My name is Barbara. I'm 62 years old, and at my only daughter's wedding rehearsal, her fiancé told me to get out. So I took back the $75,000 I was paying for the whole affair and taught them the real meaning of the word broke. It's a heck of a story, and it's all true. I'm telling it now because I think there are a lot of women out there who might see a piece of themselves in my shoes. Before I get into it, I'd love to know where you're all reading this from. What country are you in? What time is it there? Let me know in the comments. It makes me feel a little less alone knowing there are people all over the world listening. Okay, here we go. The restaurant sat on the edge of Lake Monroe, its wide glass windows reflecting the last fiery streaks of an Indiana sunset. Inside, the low hum of happy chatter filled the air, punctuated by the gentle clinking of wine glasses. It was the rehearsal dinner for my daughter, Melissa, and her fiancé, James. Every single detail, from the crisp white linens to the ridiculously expensive floral arrangements, had been handpicked by them and paid for by me. And I was happy to do it, truly. Watching Melissa, my heart swelled with a familiar, aching pride. At 28, she was radiant, her face flushed with excitement. All I had ever wanted was for her and her older brother David to be happy. After their father and I went through a messy divorce years ago, I'd worked tirelessly as an interior designer to make sure they never felt the financial strain. I'd poured my life savings into their college funds, celebrated every promotion and success, and now I was funding the fairy tale wedding Melissa had always dreamed of. James, her fiancé, stood up to make a toast. He was handsome, I'll give him that. Charming in a way that always felt a little too polished, a little too practiced. He raised his glass, a slick smile plastered on his face. I want to thank you all for being here. And a special, heartfelt thank you to my beautiful Melissa. You've made me the happiest man alive. He paused, letting the awes ripple through the room. Then his eyes found me at my table. And of course, thank you to Barbara for everything. The way he said it felt off, a subtle dismissal disguised as gratitude. I gave a tight, polite smile. The evening wore on, a parade of speeches and congratulations. I noticed Melissa barely looked at me, her attention entirely consumed by James. When she did glance my way, her eyes would quickly dart away, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name crossing her features. I told myself it was just wedding jitters. The main courses were being cleared when James approached my table. Melissa trailed behind him, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Barbara, can we talk for a second?" James asked, his voice low. "Of course," I said, dabbing my lips with a napkin. "Is something wrong?" He leaned in, the charming smile gone, replaced by a cold, hard sneer. "Something's wrong?" "Yes, something's wrong. You've been moping around all night, making everyone uncomfortable. You had to have your little moment during my toast, didn't you?" I blinked, completely stunned. "What are you talking about? I haven't done anything." "Oh, please," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that only I and a silent Melissa could hear. "You and your martyr act. You think paying for all this gives you the right to cast a shadow over our happiness?" My breath caught in my throat. I looked at Melissa, my heart pleading with her to speak, to defend me, to say anything. She just stood there, twisting the diamond engagement ring on her finger, the ring I'd helped pay for, and refused to meet my eyes. Her silence was a roar, an endorsement, an agreement. She had stood there and watched him humiliate me, and in doing so, she had held the knife for him. My mind, unbidden, began to play a highlight reel of my own foolishness. I saw myself at the bridal shop swiping my credit card for a $10,000 dress Melissa had to have, even though it was twice the budget we'd discussed. "Oh, Mom, please," she'd wheedled. "It's my dream dress." And I, like a fool, had caved. I saw James, a few months back, casually mentioning his car troubles. "The salary from my new investment consulting job is great, but it's tied up in portfolios right now," he sighed.
The next week, I'd co-signed a lease for him on a new luxury SUV because Melissa had looked at me with those wide, pleading eyes. He needs to look professional for his clients, Mom.
Red flags. They had been everywhere, a whole parade of them, and I had willfully ignored every single one, painting them a pleasant shade of beige in my mind, because I so desperately wanted to believe in my daughter's happiness. I wanted to believe this slick, ambitious man truly loved her, and wasn't just in love with the comfortable lifestyle I provided. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. My own father, a stern but fair man, on his deathbed. He had pulled me close, his voice a reedy whisper. "Barbara," he'd said, "don't let them take your kindness for weakness." He had left me a modest inheritance, the seed money that allowed me to start my design business after my divorce. I had used that money to build a life for my children, to give them everything my ex-husband and I couldn't. And now I had let them do exactly what my father had warned against. The anger began to bubble up then, hot and fierce, burning away the tears. It wasn't just anger at them. It was anger at myself. Anger for being so blind, so eager to please, so terrified of being the controlling mother that I'd relinquished all control, all boundaries, all self-respect. That was the line David, my son, always used. "Mom, don't be so controlling." It was the excuse he gave for every poor decision, every request for a loan he never intended to repay. He and Melissa had become experts at managing me, at playing on my fears and my generosity. I finally turned the key in the ignition, the engine humming to life. I wasn't going to drive home. Not yet. I just drove, leaving the manicured lawns of the lakeside restaurant behind, heading out onto the dark, empty highways that crisscross the Indiana countryside. The endless fields of corn, shrouded in darkness, seemed to stretch on forever, a reflection of the emptiness that had just opened up inside me. This was my dark night of the soul, the moment where I had to face the truth, not just about my children, but about myself. I had raised them, but I had also enabled them. I had loved them, but I had failed to teach them the value of respect and gratitude. The pain of that realization was a bitter pill to swallow. After an hour of aimless driving, I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of a deserted county road. I took a deep breath, the smell of damp earth filling the car. The tears were gone. The shaking had stopped. In their place was a resolve as cold and hard as steel. I reached for my phone, my fingers steady now. I didn't call my son. I didn't call my sister. I called the one person I knew would understand, the one person who had seen me through the darkest days of my divorce and had never, ever judged me. My best friend, Susan. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and sleepy. "Barb, it's after 10. Is everything okay?" "No, Susan," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's not, but it's about to be." And I told her everything. Susan listened without interruption, the only sound on her end the occasional sharp intake of breath. When she finished, the silence on the line was heavy, not with judgment, but with a palpable fury on my behalf. That absolute parasite! And Melissa! Oh, honey, I am so sorry. "Don't be sorry," I said, a strange sense of calm settling over me. "Be angry for me. I've been a fool, Susie." "You haven't been a fool, you've been a mother," she corrected me fiercely. "A good one. They're the ones who are broken, not you. So, what are you going to do?" The question hung in the air. For the first time all night, I knew the answer with absolute certainty. I'm going to take back my life, and I'm starting tonight. We talked for a few more minutes, her words a soothing balm on my raw nerves. She made me promise to call her in the morning. Hanging up, I felt a weight lift. The decision was made. The path was clear. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the house was dark and quiet. It was the same house I raised my children in, the one filled with ghosts of laughter and slammed doors and crayon marks on the walls. Tonight, it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a headquarters. A war room. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I walked straight to my office, the small room where I'd built my business from the ground up.
I booted up my laptop, the screen casting a pale blue light on my determined face. I wasn't going to make a single emotional phone call. This was not about rage. This was about logistics. I opened a new spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. At the top in bold, I typed Melissa's wedding expenses. One by one, I began to populate the cells. It was a meticulous, almost surgical process. Venue, Lakeside Manor, $22,000. Catering and Thomas Company, $18,500. Floral arrangements, Pedal Pushers, Inc., $7,800. Photography and videography, Evermore Studios, $9,500. Bridal gown, The Princess by some French designer, $10,200. Live band, The Downtown Collective, $6,000. The list went on, a digital monument to my own blind generosity. Each number was a fresh sting, a reminder of how easily I opened my checkbook. But as the list grew, something else grew with it. My resolve. This wasn't just about the money. This was about the principle. Each dollar represented a piece of my sacrifice, my hard work, my love, all of which had been thrown back in my face. The total at the bottom of the spreadsheet climbed past $70,000. I had written a check for $75,000 and given it to the wedding planner, Robert, just last week, with instructions to handle all final vendor payments. It was all my money, every last cent. To be thorough, I decided to cross-reference my recent credit card statements online. I logged into my account, a sick feeling of dread coiling in my stomach. I had a feeling I knew what I might find. I had given Melissa a supplementary card for wedding emergencies. Another foolish, trusting mistake. I scrolled through the recent transactions, a charge for a spa day, a few expensive dinners. Then my eyes froze on the line item that made the blood drain from my face. Transaction date, July 28th. Merchant, Maldives Luxury Resorts and Spa. Amount, $32,451. Description, Presidential Honeymoon Suite Package. $32,000. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process the audacity, the sheer breathtaking gall of it. They hadn't just accepted my generosity, they had actively stolen from me. While I was busy funding their perfect day, they were behind my back using my money to book a honeymoon that cost more than most people's cars. It was calculated, it was deceitful, it was fraud. If I had any lingering doubts, any whisper of a thought about reconciliation, that single line item obliterated it. This was no longer just a family dispute. They had crossed a line.
I took a screenshot of the transaction, my movements precise and cold. I saved it to a new folder on my desktop titled Evidence. Then I opened my contacts list. My finger hovered for a second over the name of the wedding planner, Robert. It was nearly midnight, but I didn't care. The fairy tale was over. It was time to pull back the curtain, turn on the lights, and send the entitled little actors scurrying. I pressed call. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. Robert speaking. Robert, this is Barbara Evans, I said, my voice steady. I apologize for the late hour, but this is urgent. Mrs. Evans, is everything all right? He sounded more alert now, the professional instinct kicking in. Is it about the final head count? No, Robert, I said calmly. It's about the wedding. I am canceling it. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear him processing the words, trying to make sense of them. Canceling? But the wedding is this Saturday. Everything is in place. I am aware of the date, I said, keeping my tone level. There has been a significant and unfortunate turn of events within the family. I need to confirm something with you. All vendor contracts, the venue, the catering, the flowers, everything, they're all in my name, correct? I am the signatory on every agreement.
Yes, of course, he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and concern. You insisted on handling it all directly. You're the sole client on record. Excellent, I said. And the check for $75,000 that I provided to you last week, has it been used to pay any final balances yet? No, he said quickly. Final payments are due tomorrow, Friday. The check is still securely in my office safe. Mrs. Evans, Barbara, what is going on? I appreciated the shift from professional to personal concern, but I wasn't ready to unburden myself. Robert, I am instructing you now, as your client, to cease all communication with Melissa and James. Do not process any payments. Do not move forward with any plans. I want you to call every single vendor first thing in the morning and inform them that the event on Saturday is officially canceled. Cite unforeseen family circumstances. The contracts are with me, and I am terminating them. He was quiet for another long moment. I knew I was putting him in an incredibly awkward position. Finally, he sighed. I am very sorry to hear this, Barbara. Truly. I will handle it exactly as you've instructed. The contracts will be terminated as per the cancellation clauses. There will be lost deposits, of course. I'm aware, I said. That is a price I am willing to pay. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate your professionalism. Of course, he said softly. And Barbara, I hope you're okay. I will be, and I ended the call. One down. My next call was to my lawyer, Margaret. I left her a voicemail, short and to the point. Margaret, it's Barbara. Something has happened regarding Melissa's wedding. It involves potential credit card fraud. I need to book an urgent strategy session with you for tomorrow morning. This is not just a family matter anymore. I knew Margaret would understand the gravity. She was a shark in a sensible blazer, the woman who had guided me through the darkest parts of my divorce and helped me protect my assets. She didn't deal in emotional drama. She dealt in facts and legal leverage. With the two most critical calls made, I felt a surge of empowerment. I was no longer a victim weeping in her car. I was a woman taking decisive, calculated action. Just as I was about to shut down the laptop, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen lit up with a picture of my son. A wave of exhaustion washed over me. I knew what this was. Melissa would have called him in a panic, painting me as the villain. I let it ring, but he was persistent. On the third try, I answered, putting the phone on speaker. David? Mom, what the hell did you do? He yelled, not even bothering with a hello. Melissa is hysterical. She said you walked out of the rehearsal dinner and James had to calm everyone down. What is wrong with you? What's wrong with me? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Ask your sister what happened. Ask her fiancé. She told me what happened. She said you were making a scene, being passive-aggressive all night because you weren't the center of attention, and then you just stormed out. The blatant, twisted lies stole my breath for a second. Of course that was the story. I was the crazy, attention-seeking mother. James was the hero, holding things together. David, I am not having this conversation with you right now, I said with my patience worn to a thread. Oh, you bet we are, he shot back. You have to fix this. You're going to call them and apologize right now. You are ruining your daughter's life. No, I said, the single word hanging in the air. I'm not. This is just like you, Mom. This is why you can't keep a man. This is why Dad left. You're so damn controlling. The line he had used 100 times before. The line designed to cut me to the quick, to make me doubt myself, to make me fold. But tonight, it had lost its power. All it did was confirm that he was on their side. He was part of the problem, and I was done being controlled by their narrative. I took a breath and delivered the first consequence. The wedding, David, is canceled, and you can tell your sister and her fiancé that. I hung up before he could respond. The sound of his sputtering indignation cut short. I shut down the laptop. The house was silent again, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. It was the quiet of a chessboard after a game-changing move. The pieces were in motion, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one in control. The next morning, I woke before the sun, a rare feat for me, but sleep had been fitful, my mind a churning sea of betrayal and strategy. I made coffee, the familiar ritual a small anchor in the storm, and sat at my kitchen table as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows. I felt strangely calm, emptied of tears. All that remained was a cold, clear purpose. My phone had a string of missed calls and increasingly frantic texts from David. I ignored them. There was nothing more to say to him. He had chosen his side. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, Margaret's office called. Her assistant put me straight through. "Barbara," Margaret said, her voice crisp and efficient, "I got your message. What's happened?" I laid it all out for her, starting with the humiliation at the rehearsal dinner and ending with the $32,000 charge on my credit card. I emailed her the spreadsheet of expenses and the screenshot of the resort booking while we spoke. I could almost hear her gears turning in her brilliant legal mind. "Okay," she said after I finished. "First, let's separate the emotional from the legal. Emotionally, what they did is reprehensible. Legally, what they did is fraud. The unauthorized use of a credit card, especially for a sum that large, is a criminal offense. You are 100% in the right to press charges." "I don't want to send my own daughter to jail, Margaret," I said, a familiar ache in my chest. "I know," she said, her voice softening slightly, "and we won't lead with that. But knowing you can is your leverage. It's your ace in the hole. For now, you've done everything right. Canceling the contracts in your name is perfectly legal. They have no claim to your money. This is our strategy. We stay quiet. We let them make the next move. And they will. Desperate people do desperate things." Her words were a fortress around me. I felt secure, validated. I wasn't a hysterical woman. I was a wronged party with a strong legal position. We scheduled a formal meeting for the afternoon, and I hung up, feeling 10 pounds lighter. My newfound peace was shattered around noon by the sound of tires screeching in my driveway. I looked out the window to see David's pickup truck parked haphazardly, the driver's door flung open. He stormed up the walkway, his face a mask of thunder. I met him at the door, blocking his entry. "You're not welcome in my house right now, David." "I don't care," he snarled, trying to push past me. I stood my ground. "You have to fix this. Robert, the wedding planner, just called Melissa. He told her everything was canceled. He wouldn't even talk to her, said he could only speak to you. She's a mess, Mom, a complete wreck." "She should have thought of that last night," I said, my voice like ice. "This isn't about last night. It's about your ego. You're punishing her because your feelings got hurt." I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so twisted. My feelings didn't get hurt. I was publicly humiliated and dismissed by the man she is supposed to marry, while she stood by and watched. And that was before I found out they stole over $30,000 from me. He actually faltered at that, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second. "What? That's not possible. Melissa wouldn't." "Oh, she would. And she did. A luxury honeymoon in the Maldives, all on my credit card, without my permission." He seemed to search for a defense, a rebuttal, but found none. So he defaulted to his usual tactic, attack. "Even if that's true," he stammered, "you're still blowing this out of proportion. It's just money to you. You have plenty of it. You're just being selfish and controlling, trying to prove a point." I stared at my son, this grown man I had raised, and I felt a profound sense of pity. He couldn't see it. He couldn't see past his own resentment and his sister's manipulative tears. "This is why Dad left, you know. He spat, his voice laced with years of bitterness. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand you holding everything over his head. Your success, your money. You suffocated him, and now you're trying to suffocate Melissa. That old wound, the one he and Melissa had poked and prodded for years. The failure of my marriage. A complex tragedy of two people growing apart, reduced to a simple, cruel weapon to be used against me whenever I didn't give them what they wanted. But this time, the weapon glanced off, because I saw his accusation for what it truly was, a desperate deflection. Your father and I had our own problems, I said, my voice soft but firm. Many of them were financial, it's true. He made some very poor choices and couldn't face the consequences. You're starting to sound just like him, David, blaming everyone else for a mess of your own making. I knew about his latest business venture, some vague tech startup that had quietly folded a few months ago. I knew he was struggling financially, though he'd never admit it. My words hit their mark. The anger in his face curdled into something else. Shock. Defeat. You need to leave, I said, no longer asking. We have nothing more to discuss. He stared at me for a long moment, his chest heaving. Then, without another word, he turned, stomped back to his truck, and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering poison of his words hanging in the quiet suburban air. The rest of the day was a blur of legalities. I met with Margaret, signed affidavits, and gave her a full accounting of every dollar. She drafted cease and desist letters and began the process of formally disputing the fraudulent charge with my credit card company. Every action felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of my new, fortified life. By evening, I was emotionally drained, but resolute. I made myself a simple dinner and was just settling in to watch a movie when Susan called, her voice urgent. "Barb, you need to look at Facebook, right now." My heart sank. "What now?" "Just look," she said. With a sense of weary dread, I pulled up the social media app on my phone. And there it was, at the top of my feed, a video posted an hour ago by Melissa. The thumbnail was a close-up of her face, tear-streaked and blotchy. The title read, "My mother is ruining my wedding, the heartbreaking truth." I pressed play, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The video was a masterpiece of manipulation. Melissa sat on a couch, James's arm wrapped protectively around her. She sobbed into the camera, telling a wild, fabricated story. "I don't know why she's doing this to us," she wept, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "My mom, I love her, but she's always been a little difficult. I think she's jealous. She's never liked James, and she can't stand to see me happy with someone else." James chimed in, his voice thick with fake sincerity. "We've tried everything. We just want a simple wedding, but she had to make it this huge, extravagant affair to show off her money. It was never about Melissa, it was all about her. When we tried to set some boundaries, she had a complete meltdown at the rehearsal dinner, and now she's canceled everything. She's trying to sabotage us just days before we're meant to say I do. We're devastated." They never mentioned who paid for it. They never mentioned the verbal assault. They never mentioned the $32,000 theft. They painted me as a toxic, narcissistic monster and themselves as the innocent victims of my jealousy. The video was already racking up thousands of views, shares, and a flood of sympathetic comments. "Your mother sounds horrible. Stay strong." Typical boomer parent thinks their money buys them control. "Don't let her ruin your special day. Start a GoFundMe." I felt sick. They were trying to destroy my reputation, turning my friends and community against me with a web of lies. My first instinct was to respond, to post my own video with the receipts, the bank statements, the whole ugly truth. I called Margaret, my voice shaking with fury. "Did you see it? I have to respond to this." "No," Margaret said, her voice a firm, calming presence. "You absolutely do not. That is exactly what they want. They want to drag you down into a public mudslinging match. You are a respected member of your community. You will not engage. You will maintain a dignified silence. Trust me on this, Barbara. Let them hang themselves. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, but I trusted her. I logged out of Facebook and turned off my phone.
For the next 24 hours, I lived in a self-imposed bubble. I gardened. I read a novel. I cleaned out my closets. Anything to keep from looking at the firestorm I knew was raging online. It was my cousin, Carol, who finally broke the silence. She called me on my landline Saturday morning, what should have been Melissa's wedding day. "Barbara, honey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of warmth. Aunt Carol was the matriarch of our extended family, a no-nonsense woman whose opinion held more weight than anyone's. "I'm surviving, Carol," I said wryly. "Good," she said, "because I just lit a fire under that pity party your daughter was throwing online. I couldn't stand by and watch them do that to you." "What did you do?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "I didn't have to do much," she chuckled. "I just posted a simple comment. I wrote, 'It's a tragedy when a mother's immense generosity is met with such cruelty and disrespect. Barbara paid for every single aspect of that wedding out of love. I was there when she wrote the checks. Perhaps Melissa and James should tell everyone that part of the story.' And then I attached a photo." "A photo? What photo?" "The one you sent me last month from the bridal shop where you, Melissa, and I are all beaming, and you're holding the receipt for that $10,000 dress. The truth has a way of shining through, sweetheart." My eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. I wasn't alone in this fight. Aunt Carol's comment had opened the floodgates. The wedding planner, Robert, seeing her post, had added his own professional confirmation. "As the planner of record, I can verify that all vendor contracts were exclusively funded by Mrs. Barbara Evans." The florist chimed in. A few guests from the rehearsal dinner who had overheard James's tone, if not his exact words, added their support. The narrative began to crumble. The tide of public opinion, once so firmly on their side, was turning. The trap they had set for me was now snapping shut on them. Margaret had been right. All I had to do was give them enough rope, and they had gleefully, publicly, hung themselves with it. What should have been Melissa's wedding day came and went. The sun rose and set. The world kept turning. Instead of sitting in a church pew, I spent the day with Susan. We took a long walk in a nature preserve, the silence of the woods a welcome antidote to the drama of the past 48 hours. I didn't feel sad. I felt liberated. The online fallout, as Susan related to me, was brutal. Melissa and James's sob story had disintegrated under the weight of facts. The comments section had turned from a well of sympathy into a trial by jury. People were calling them grifters, frauds, entitled brats. The GoFundMe page someone had started for them was taken down after being flooded with negative reports. They had wanted to be the center of attention, and they got their wish, just not in the way they'd intended. They went silent. Their social media pages were scrubbed of the video. It was as if they had dropped off the face of the earth. For a few days, there was nothing. A blissful, welcome quiet. I started to think, maybe, that this was the end of it. They would lick their wounds, and I would begin to heal. I should have known better. A week after the non-wedding, I received an email. The sender was Melissa. My finger hovered over the delete button, but a morbid curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The email was long and rambling, a transparent attempt at an apology that was really just another form of manipulation. "Dearest Mom," it began. My eyes rolled so hard I nearly gave myself a headache. "My heart is broken. James and I are so lost without you. We know things were said in anger, and we are so sorry if your feelings were hurt. The stress of the wedding just got to us all. James feels terrible about what happened. He was just trying to protect me.
We've been through a nightmare this past week with all those horrible people online saying such untrue things. There was no ownership, no real accountability, just blame shifting and playing the victim. But then came the hook. We love you more than anything. We want to make this right. We can't bear the thought of our family being torn apart like this. Could we please have a dinner, just the four of us? You, me, James, and David, to talk everything through and apologize properly. We can clear the air and figure out how to move forward. We need our mom back. I read the email twice. It was a trap, as plain as day. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They had lost their public support, and now they were crawling back for a private peace summit, where I was sure they intended to gang up on me, gaslight me, and pressure me into forgiving and, most importantly, forgetting. My old self, the Barbara of 2 weeks ago, would have jumped at the chance. She would have seen the words, "We need our mom back," and her heart would have melted. She would have agreed to anything for a chance at reconciliation. But that Barbara was gone. The new Barbara saw the email for what it was, a final desperate move on their chessboard. And she decided it was time to make her own. I called Margaret. "They're trying to set up a meeting," I told her, and read her the email. Margaret laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Ha, predictable. They're cornered. What do you want to do?" "I want to accept," I said. "Barbara," she began, a note of caution in her voice. "No, listen," I said, a plan forming in my mind, sharp and clear. "I want to accept, but on my terms. I'm not going to their territory, and we're not meeting at my house. I'm going to book a private room at a restaurant, a neutral ground, a place where they can't raise their voices." "Okay," Margaret said, intrigued. "I like it. You control the environment." "I don't want you there, Margaret," I continued. "This can't look like a legal ambush. This needs to look like I'm genuinely considering their apology. They need to walk in feeling confident, like they're about to win." "So you're setting a trap of your own," she said, a hint of admiration in her tone. "Exactly," I said. "They think they're coming to manipulate a grieving mother. They have no idea who they're about to meet." I spent the rest of the afternoon making arrangements. I booked a private dining room at The Foundation, a quiet, elegant steakhouse downtown. I made the reservation for 4 people. Then I made another, much more important phone call. A call to a small town in rural Ohio. It was a wild card, a long shot, but if it worked, it would be the one thing they would never, ever see coming. That evening, I replied to Melissa's email. "Melissa, I accept. Let's meet for dinner. I've booked a room at the Foundation for Wednesday night at 7 p.m. I look forward to hearing what you have to say."
The message was sent. The stage was set. Not their stage this time, but mine. And the final act was about to begin. The private dining room at the Foundation was exactly what I wanted. Elegant, understated, and soundproof. A single round table sat in the center, set for a meal that I knew would never be eaten. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum in my chest. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. I'd spent the last 2 days preparing. The most important part of my plan had been confirmed that morning with a single text message. "We're checked in at the hotel. See you tonight." My children and their puppeteer arrived exactly at 7 p.m. Melissa rushed to me, her arms outstretched for a hug. "Oh, Mom, thank you so much for coming." I allowed the embrace, but didn't return it, letting my arms stay at my sides. It was a small gesture, but it set the tone. I was not here to be won over. She pulled back, her smile faltering slightly. David grunted a hello, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He looked haggard, the stress of the past week etched onto his face. And James was back to his old self, the charming facade firmly in place. He gave me a somber, apologetic look that was pure performance. "Barbara, from the bottom of my heart, I am so sorry," he said, placing a hand over his heart. "I was an idiot. The pressure, the stress, it's no excuse. I was horrible to you, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you and Melissa. It was a good speech. He had probably practiced it in the mirror. We all sat down. The air was thick with unspoken agendas. They thought this was their final play, the moment they'd use their combined emotional weight to crush my resolve. "We just want our family back," Melissa began, her lower lip trembling on cue. "We can get past this. We can replan the wedding, something smaller, more intimate." "We can pay for it ourselves," James jumped in quickly. "My new promotion at work came through, the one I was waiting for. The salary is significant. We don't need a cent from you, Barbara. We just want your blessing, your forgiveness." A promotion. Right. The lies were so effortless for him. I let them talk for a few more minutes, letting them spin their web of remorse and reconciliation. I listened patiently, my expression unreadable. I watched David shift uncomfortably in his chair, knowing he was only here as reluctant muscle, a third vote against me. Finally, when there was a lull in their performance, I spoke. "That's a wonderful story, James," I said, my voice calm and even. "The story of your success, your deep remorse, it's very compelling." He beamed, thinking he had won. "It's all true, Barbara. I'm sure it is. In fact, it's such a good story. Why don't you tell it to your parents?" A look of sheer confusion crossed his face. My parents? What do they have to do with this?" "Well," I said, placing my hands on the table, "they came all this way to celebrate your wedding. The least you can do is tell them how sorry you are." As if on cue, the door to the private dining room opened. Standing in the doorway were two people James clearly never expected to see in a million years. A man and a woman, in their late 60s, both with tired lines around their eyes, dressed in simple, off-the-rack clothes that looked out of place in the lavish restaurant. The woman clutched a worn handbag to her chest. It was Frank and Mary, James's parents, flown in from their small working-class town in Ohio. The color drained from James's face. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Melissa and David just stared, their mouths slightly agape, completely bewildered. "Mom? Dad?" James stammered, his voice suddenly a few octaves higher. What are you doing here?" His mother, Mary, stepped forward. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as his, were filled with anger, but not with a deep, bottomless well of disappointment. She was holding a printout of the spreadsheet I had emailed her 2 days prior. "Your mother-in-law was kind enough to invite us, Jimmy." She was concerned. "She showed us the bills for this wedding. Over $75,000. And this," she held up the paper, her hand shaking, "this honeymoon for $32,000? She looked from the paper to her son, her face a mask of pain and confusion. "Jimmy," she whispered, her voice cracking, "you told us you were struggling. You borrowed $5,000 from our retirement savings last year to pay your taxes? Where did all this money come from?" The trap had been sprung, and the look of pure, unadulterated panic on James's face was more satisfying than any court judgment could ever be. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint, muffled sounds of the main restaurant outside our door. It felt a world away. Inside our little room, a universe was collapsing. James sat frozen, his charming mask shattered, revealing the terrified, cornered man beneath. His eyes darted from his parents' heartbroken faces to Melissa's stunned expression, then to me. In my eyes, he found no sympathy, only the quiet finality of a bill coming due. I can explain it," he stammered, his voice losing its silken quality, becoming thin and reedy. It's an investment, a short-term loan. The promotion I mentioned, it comes with a huge bonus. I was going to pay it all back." His father, Frank, a broad-shouldered man who looked like he'd worked with his hands his entire life, took a step forward. He wasn't loud like David. His anger was a low, rumbling thing. "An investment?"
he said, his voice very low, as he gestured around the opulent room. "You lied to us, son. You lied to this good woman." He nodded his head toward me. "And from the looks of it, you lied to this young lady, too." All eyes turned to Melissa. She was pale as a sheet. Her gaze locked on James as if seeing him for the first time, the man she was supposed to be her partner. The successful, confident fiancé was crumbling before her eyes, exposed as a fraud and a liar by his own parents. The fairy tale had just turned into a horror story. "James," she whispered, the single word hanging in the air, full of dawning horror. "Is that true? Did you borrow money from them?" James couldn't speak. He just stared at his plate, the muscles in his jaw working furiously. His mother, Mary, delivered the final devastating blow. She wasn't angry anymore. She just sounded tired. So incredibly tired. "He didn't just borrow money, dear," she said softly to Melissa. "He told us you two were struggling. He said your mother had cut you off after her divorce and that you needed help just to make rent. He said this wedding was just going to be a small affair at the count house. He played on our sympathy, on our love for him." The sound Melissa made was a small, choked gasp. The man who was supposed to be her partner had not only lied to his parents, he had used a twisted version of her own life as a prop in his long con. He had painted her as a victim to them, just as he had painted me as a villain to the world.
David, for the first time, seemed to grasp the sheer scale of the deception. He looked at James with a mixture of disgust and dawning self-awareness. He had hitched his wagon to this man, defended him, and in doing so had made himself an accomplice to the fraud. Now was my turn. I had let the emotional truth do its work. It was time for the factual nail in the coffin. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the table so it stopped directly in front of James. It was a copy of the credit card statement with the $32,451 charge for the Maldives trip. "And this," I said, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence, "is the investment I believe you forgot to mention to anyone, the one you charged to my card without my permission." I turned my gaze to Frank and Mary. "I am not a vengeful woman," I said, my voice softening. "I could have called the police. Margaret, my lawyer, strongly advised it. But I don't want to send my daughter's ex-fiancé to prison." The word ex-fiancé hung in the air, a declaration. "I wanted you, his parents, to know the truth, because this is not just about money. It's about character, or the lack thereof." I stood up. "I will not be pressing charges," I said, looking directly at James, "on the condition that the full amount is repaid to me within 90 days. How you get it is your problem. David," I said, turning to my son, "I suggest you untangle yourself from this mess immediately. Your debt to him is now the least of your worries." I looked at Melissa. Her face was a mess of tears and shattered illusions. There was no anger left in me for her, only a deep, aching pity. "You have a lot to think about, Melissa," I said quietly. Then I turned to Frank and Mary. "I am so sorry you were dragged into this. Your son is your responsibility now." I picked up my purse. The meal was over. The performance was done. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. "Oh, and James," I said, looking back at his ruined face, "I've already paid for the room. Consider it my final payment for the lesson." And with that, I walked out, leaving the wreckage of their lies and my two children to confront the cold, hard truth of the people they had chosen to become. The days that followed were quiet, but it was a heavy, ringing quiet, the kind that comes after a massive explosion. I didn't hear from Melissa or David, and I didn't expect to. The shrapnel from that disastrous dinner was still flying. Susan kept me updated, piecing together the story from what Aunt Carol had heard through the family grapevine. Frank and Mary had taken James back to Ohio with them, thoroughly shamed and defeated. The engagement was, of course, officially off. There was no grand announcement, just a quiet fizzle into non-existence. James had deactivated all of his social media, disappearing from the digital world as completely as he had from our lives. Melissa, I was told, was a ghost. She had moved out of the apartment she and James had shared,
an apartment I now realized I had been subsidizing, and was staying on a friend's couch. She wasn't taking calls from anyone, not even David. She had built her entire identity around being James's fiancé, around the promise of a lavish, effortless life. With him gone, her entire world had been revealed as a hollow stage set, and she was left standing alone in the middle of it. Part of me, the mother part that never truly dies, felt a pang of sorrow for her, but another, stronger part of me knew this was necessary. This was the rock bottom she needed to hit. She couldn't be rescued this time. She had to find her own way out of the rubble, or she would be lost in it forever. David called me once, about a week later. His voice was subdued, stripped of his usual bluster. "Mom," he said, I wanted to say I'm sorry." "For what, specifically, David?" I asked. Not unkindly, but I wasn't going to let him off with a vague, blanket apology. He was quiet for a long moment. "For everything," he finally said, his voice thick. "For not believing you, for saying what I said about Dad, for getting mixed up with James." He confessed then that James had loaned him $15,000 to cover debts from his failed business, and the pressure to pay it back was why he so aggressively defended him. He was trapped. "I see," I said. "Well, that's a problem you'll have to solve on your own now. I can't help you." "I know," he said. "I don't expect you to. I needed you to know. I was wrong." It was the first time in his adult life I had ever heard him admit fault without a single excuse attached. It was a start. "Thank you for telling me, David." And we ended the call. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first crack of light in a very dark tunnel. The money from James arrived in a cashier's check 92 days later, outside the deadline. It came in a plain envelope with no return address and no note. Just the full amount, $32,451. I deposited it without ceremony. That chapter was officially closed. With the drama finally receding, I was left to face my own life. I found myself wandering through my large family home, the one I had fought so hard to keep after the divorce, and realizing it no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. The walls echoed with painful memories of my enabling, of their entitlement, of my own lonely sacrifices. I didn't want to live in a museum. I wanted to live in the future. That weekend, I called a realtor. The decision came to me with the same clarity as the one to cancel the wedding. It was time to sell. It was time to let go of the past, literally and figuratively. Some people might have seen it as running away. To me, it felt like running towards something. The house sold in less than a month. Standing in the empty rooms on closing day, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the lightness of shedding a heavy skin. I had my savings, the money from the sale, and the repaid funds from James. I had a significant nest egg. I could have retired comfortably, traveled the world, bought a condo in Florida, and played bridge for the rest of my days. But I realized I wasn't done yet. The fire that had fueled my design business, the passion for creating something out of nothing, hadn't been extinguished. It had just been redirected. I thought about what my father had told me about not letting people take my kindness for weakness. And I thought about what I would have told my younger self, the young woman starting over after a painful divorce, fighting for custody, terrified of the future. An idea began to form, an idea so bold and exciting it made my heart beat faster. I wasn't going to just start a new life. I was going to build a new legacy.
Selling the house was the easy part. The hard part was figuring out what came next. For weeks, I lived in a small, furnished apartment, surrounded by boxes, and I thought, really thought, what do I want the next 20 or 30 years of my life to look like? My career as an interior designer had been successful, but it had always been in service of other people's visions, other people's homes. I had spent 40 years building a life for my children. Now, for the first time, I had the freedom and the resources to build something entirely for myself. But I didn't want it to be just for myself. The idea that had sparked in my mind on closing day began to take shape. I thought about all the women I knew like me, women who had put their careers on hold to raise families,
women who had gone through messy divorces that left them financially vulnerable, women who, in their 50s and 60s, found themselves with a wealth of experience and wisdom, but were often overlooked in the traditional job market. They were seen as being past their prime, when in reality, they were just getting ready for their second act. I thought about the seed money my father's inheritance had given me. It wasn't just money, it was a vote of confidence. It was someone believing in me when I barely believed in myself. That was it. That's what I would do. I called Margaret again, but this time the topic wasn't fraud or family disputes. It was about creation. Margaret, I said, a thrill in my voice I hadn't felt in years. I want to start a foundation. I laid out my vision, the Evans Legacy Foundation. Its mission would be simple: to provide seed money grants and mentorship to women over 50 who wanted to start their own small businesses. It would be a fund for the overlooked, the underestimated, the women who had a lifetime of ideas but lacked the capital to bring them to life. It was a way to turn my own painful experience into a source of strength and opportunity for others. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Barbara, that is the best damn idea I've heard all year. Let's make it happen." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity, but it was a joyful, purposeful chaos. There were lawyers and accountants, business plans and mission statements. I leased a small, unpretentious office space downtown. I used my design skills to create a space that was warm, welcoming, and professional. It felt more like home to me than my old house ever had in its final years. I poured my energy, my experience, and a significant portion of my funds into it. I assembled a small board of directors, including Susan and Aunt Carol, women I trusted implicitly. 6 months after that terrible night at the rehearsal dinner, we were ready to award our first grant. We had dozens of applications, stories of resilience and creativity that moved me to tears. We chose a woman named Clara, a 58-year-old widow who had a passion for baking and a brilliant business plan for an artisanal bread delivery service. Her application had been full of heart, but also meticulously researched. She just needed that initial push. The final scene of my old life was me walking out of a restaurant, leaving destruction in my wake. The first scene of my new life was me sitting in my new office, the sun streaming through the window, sliding a check for $25,000 across the desk to a woman whose eyes were shining with disbelief and gratitude. Clara looked at the check, then at me, her hands trembling slightly as she took it. I don't know what to say. No one has ever believed in me like this." I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I know the feeling," I said. "Don't ever let anyone tell you it's too late to start over. It's not." We sat and talked for an hour, not as benefactor and recipient, but as two women who understood the grit it takes to reinvent yourself. As she was leaving, my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen. A text message from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew who it was. Melissa. The text message was short, just a few words that carried the weight of 1,000 unsent letters. "Mom, I'm so sorry for everything. Can we please talk?" A year ago, those words would have been a balm, a key that unlocked my immediate forgiveness. I would have dropped everything, called her back, and wept with relief. Now, I simply looked at the message, my heart calm. I thought about the journey of the past year, the searing humiliation, the cold resolve, the strategic dismantling of their lies, and the quiet, steady work of building something new from the ashes. I was not the same woman who had sat in that restaurant, beaming with naive pride. That woman was gone, and I didn't miss her. My life was full now, but in a different way. It wasn't filled with the chaotic drama of my children's demands. It was filled with purpose. It was filled with Clara's weekly progress reports on her bakery, with planning sessions for the foundation, with long, peaceful evenings spent with friends who respected and cherished me. It was a life built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. The idea of a tearful, dramatic reconciliation with Melissa felt exhausting. It felt like a step backward, back into a dynamic that had nearly destroyed me. The wound was no longer raw, but the scar was deep. A scar is a reminder of a lesson learned, and my lesson was about boundaries. I thought about what forgiveness really meant. I had been taught it was an act of grace, something you gave freely, but I had learned it was also something you had to be ready to receive. Was Melissa ready? Had she done the hard work of looking at herself, of understanding the depths of her own weakness and entitlement? Or was she just lonely and broke, reaching for the comfort of the maternal safety net she had so carelessly shredded? I didn't know the answer, and I realized it wasn't my job to find out. It was her journey now. My role as the constant rescuer, the fixer of all things, was over. I had retired. With a sense of quiet finality, I typed out a reply. It wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was just honest. I need more time, Melissa, and I think you do too. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It wasn't a door slammed shut. It was a boundary drawn in the sand. It said, I see you, but I must protect myself. I love you, but I love my own peace more. It was, perhaps, the healthiest thing I had ever said to her. My work is my focus now. The Evans Legacy Foundation is thriving. We've funded 3 more businesses since Clara's. A woman who started a senior care placement service, and another who designs adaptive clothing for people with disabilities. These women, their stories, their courage, they are my inheritance now. They are the legacy I am building. I'm telling you this story not to garner sympathy or to shame my children. I'm telling you because I know, deep in my bones, that I am not alone. I know there are women reading this who have felt unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. Women who have given and given until there was nothing left for themselves. If that's you, I want you to hear me. Your kindness is not a weakness. Your generosity is not an open invitation for disrespect. And it is never, ever too late to cancel the party, walk out the door, and start building a foundation of your own. Your life is your own, and you are the only one who can decide what it's worth. Thank you for listening to my story. It means the world to me.